Hi. Um, Tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about grow lights, extra lighting in the greenhouse and how it can enhance your plants. Now lighting is a very technical subject. Could go on for 2 or 3 hours but it would become boring and most people wouldn't understand what I'm actually talking about. I've studied lights for 30 years, I've grown with lights for 30 years. So what I'm actually going to talk about tonight is what would be more beneficial to the novice or someone just starting off with lights. And I'll tell you from my experience rather than what I've picked up from travelling around and looking at people's lights. I started growing with lights 30 years ago, and I started off just with this, well, it was called a Sunblaster light, the first one I ever bought. It was more red spectrum light, and I will talk a little bit about spectrum, about intensity of light as we get on. The Sunblaster gave off slightly more red light, which wasn't suiting the plants I was trying to grow. It did certain things, which I will go into a little bit further on. So I soon switched over to straight fluorescence, and I had a bank of 8 fluorescents, 6 foot long, on one side of the greenhouse, and a bank on the opposite side, 8 fluorescents, 6 foot long again. They were only 2 inches apart, and they covered a 3 foot bench, 6 foot long on either side of the greenhouse door. They grew very well and plants grew well, but that was 30 years ago and things have moved on a little bit from then. So let's just start from the basics up over. First of all, what is light? We can't actually see light, but we can't see without light. Plants see light in a slightly different way to what we do. Now one thing I'm going to say, it's very easy, or it's easier to understand lighting if we understand plants first of all. 3 things on this earth which were made are people, human beings, animals and plants, and we all need the same thing to survive. We all need sunshine for definite, we all need water to survive, we all need to be fed to survive. We're all made up of cells and living tissues. We all have chemicals in our bodies. Most of our medicines are derived from plants, different types of plants. They all hold slightly different types of chemicals which we need in certain ways, but experiments have been made where most of our medicines come from plants. In saying that, we all need oxygen to breathe, so we are all related somewhere or another. So whenever I have a plant that's struggling or something wrong with it, I always relate back to myself and think, would I be happy with what I've done to that plant? And if I'm not happy, then more or less the plant won't be. So plants, what do they need? They need oxygen to breathe, both through the roots and through the air. They need sunshine. They grow better in sunshine. They need to be fed. They need to be watered, to be kept clean. And once we understand that, we can then understand this, why we use lights in the greenhouse. This time of year, temperatures drop. We call it the fall or the autumn or winter. We're in the midst of winter at the moment. We've had a big storm here over the last 2 or 3 days. It's very cold outside tonight. Temperature does play a part in the greenhouse. We all tend to think if we give a little bit extra heat, plants will grow better. Not necessarily. Certainly with certain subjects such as leeks and onions, which are the main reasons that we put lights on to enhance the leek and onion that we grow. So it's not necessarily temperature, it's more so lighting. Lighting does play a big part in how your plants will grow. Obviously they do need nutrients, they need a decent compost to grow in, and then they need to be kept clean and healthy. Anyhow, we'll go back onto the lights, and first off, as I say, I started with straight fluorescence with warm white tubes, and these did work and plants grew very well in them. But later days, a good friend of mine, he used to grow a lot of plants as I did, and he said, look John, why don't you grow all the pot leeks and blanch leeks? He says, I'll get some from you at planting time. I'll grow all the onions and I'll give you some onions at planting time. I did that. We did that for 2 or 3 years, and every year that I got onions from him, I actually got botrytis in my onions and in mildews, and I lost them. Looking further into it through travelling in the world and travelling to Holland several times a year, the growers across there are heavily into lights, which we can touch on as well. But I found out that the straight fluorescence that we were using didn't give a complete immune system to the plant, so it was lacking in certain things. What we need to understand with light is the plants see slightly different to what we do, and they use light in a different way to a human being does. But we get vitamins from the sunlight. It hits our skin and we absorb it and we produce vitamins. Plants photosynthesize, so they absorb the nutrients from the sun, they turn it into sugars, and that flows through the plant and feeds the plant, and it makes the plant grow. If it's given the wrong intensity of light, strength of light, or it's given the wrong colour of light, which is the colours of the rainbow, from infrared at one end through to ultraviolet at the other end, the blue light, plants will respond in different ways. And we found that the fluorescence weren't giving a full spectrum to the plant, and it was elongating the cell in it, but it was also not giving a total immune system. So we switched off the fluorescence, and the first set of lights I bought thereafter was straight into the sodiums, and at the time it was sodium 400 watts Son-T agro bulb. This was as near the sun at that particular point, which was about 20 years ago, and they grew quite well. They did very well, and they are still used today. I'm not using the same type, but I have got that kind in here. I'm going to show you quite a few different lights which I do have in the greenhouse, and I'll speak, what I feel is right, especially for the amateur. Moving on from there, I moved into the metal halide, high pressure metal halide bulbs. They give more intensity in a blue light at 600 watt, which I use, and they are very good, especially for veg growth, not necessarily for flowering. So again, we need to look at the crop that we're growing. If you lads out there want to try cannabis, you need the more of the sodium bulbs than you do the the metal halide. Should have brought a drink in with me. Recently, well, quite a while ago, but fairly recently, companies brought out the T5 lights, which are very good, and they're really good for the amateur. They're not an intense light, they don't give you a real boost in growth, but they give you a nice gentle growth, and they're certainly great for enhancing propagation. We'll take a look at those. Also, more recently, we've come to use the the one, forgotten the name. I'll come to them in a present minute. There's so many. I'm getting old and I'm starting to lose my memory. I'm stood looking at them, I still can't think of the name of them. We'll come to them in a second. There's a lot to know about every light that you use. First of all, the intensity, the heat it gives off, or whether it doesn't give heat off, whether you need fans with it. We've got to think of the CO2 emissions that are around the lights. We need ventilation with lights. If you've got plants under light, you need to make sure there's enough fertility in the compost that the plants will grow. Do we enclose the light into a growth cabinet, or do we put it into an open greenhouse? If you put lights in an open greenhouse, it will give light off, but the light is not restricted in any way, and it will just leave the greenhouse through the sides where the glass is. So it's, it covers a bigger span, but it's not as intense as bringing it into a growth cabinet. We'll take a look. I have a growth cabinet, and we'll have a look at what the plants do inside there. The height that the bulb should be away from the plants are slightly different on every plant. So again, we'll need to look individually as we go through all the different bulbs. Anyhow, I could go on talking here for a while and keep on losing my memory, but we'll start looking at the bulbs. I'm going to remove the camera from the tripod. Right, we'll move along, and I'll turn the camera around and we'll start looking at the lights. Right, this is the first LED, that's what I was trying to think of. These are the newer type of lights. They still haven't caught up with the main growing lights that we have, but they are getting better all the time. These are all on pulleys, as we can see. I can take the different heights. Now this is one of the latest ones. I bought this direct from China. This is a dual spectrum bulb at the moment. It's called a bar light. This particular light cost around about £220. There is a switch on the top, and this switch will change the colour of this light. I'm going to show you. We have a dual spectrum on here at the moment. This is ultraviolet, gives a blue light off. And then we have the red light. I'll take it down so you can see. That's the red light. That's the dual spectrum. And that's the blue light. And you can see it does change and the camera picks up the different colours. Moving back, I've switched that one off. Onto the next one. It's another LED. It's a bigger one. This one was this is over 4 foot long. This is full dual spectrum with a red band down the centre. I don't know if the camera picks the colour up there, but there's a band of red lights right down the centre of that. This doesn't change colour. It's on that particular colour all the time. Again, the intensity is nowhere near on the metal halides and the high pressure sodiums. So at the present moment, I don't think these particular lights are good enough unless you pay thousands of pounds for the really latest high output ones, which may match in with what we've been starting to look at here. I don't know if we can actually pick these up, but this is a metal halide light. This is a 600 watt. These are powered by the old Maxi Bright boxes. The row there, which one box does one light and it ignites it. That's a 600 watt metal halide. It's a Vegmaster bulb, and this is slight high to the blue end of the spectrum. Quite intense and very bright. Moving along, the same again. Same again. We now move on to a different kind of light. This is the sodium bulb. This is a Sunmaster bulb. Again 600 watt. It gives more to the red end off, but in actual fact it is a dual spectrum bulb. And this is good for onions. These onions in the early stages were given 10 days on the light. These are in 5 litre pots. These onions were started on the 31st of October, and quite large onions. There's only 4 there. There's a batch here which were given 7 days on the light. These were sown 2 weeks behind the first batch, and this is what lights will actually do, certainly the high intensity lights. The lights that I've just shown you in the greenhouse, these are on pulleys at the top, so they can be lifted up or down. Try and show you up the height here. Pulleys up on the top, so on a string, on a cord, and these can be either heightened or lowered to suit the plants that's underneath them. But obviously these aren't cheap to run. They each cost about £20 to £25 per week to run. There's about 8 or 9 in this particular greenhouse, so obviously I don't have these on all the time because I couldn't afford it. The electric bill would be literally through the roof. I have a growth cabinet which I do keep on. The only reason these are all in here is if I have problems with growth or with health in plants, I do put a light on and lower it over the plants to help them, give them a little boost and bring them away. They need to be a minimum of 2 foot away from the actual plant. This is actually a little bit close. This light hasn't been on over these bulbs. Again, this is the sodium bulb. You can see these leaks here have been boosted. These are for a few heavyweights. This is the Yorkshire Giant, but that's actually too close, and if I left that light on it would burn the foliage on those particular plants. Moving along, I have hot boxes in the greenhouse. I haven't used them this year because it's a sulfur, which is a natural product. It does keep things clean and healthy in the greenhouse, but I have been trialling 3 new products. Well, I've only tried 2 at the moment to keep the plants clean and healthy, and they've worked very well. So I haven't used any additional, I haven't used no chemical, and I haven't used any hot boxes this year. Now this is probably the light that I would recommend people go for. This is an 8 bulb T5. This is 4 foot long. This gives off a nice light to work under, and it gives off a decent light. This doesn't burn, it gives very little heat off. You can put your hands right up to it. There's very little heat comes from that. You couldn't do that with the 600 watt bulbs, it would burn your hand. This doesn't need any ballast box. It also doesn't need any fans to keep it cool, and it can be lowered pretty close to the plants. When I start seedlings off, I usually drop this down. Again, it's on pulley systems, and this is dropped down to about 10 to 12 inches away from the plants. I would recommend probably 12 hours a day on most subjects until they start growing well. We can look at, I will look at different timings with you. Now I'll move through and show you the growth cabinet and just show you what the actual cabinet does, and then I'll switch it back onto me and I'll talk a little bit about the plants. This is in a separate room, very intense in here. This is actually a cabinet, 10 foot long, almost 4 foot deep. It has fans. These are 2 extractor fans pulling heat out of the cabinet. There's one round this corner. This is a fan sucking air from a room next door and pushing cold air into the cabinet. I have a CO2 bottle with gauges on, and this actually pushes CO2 into the cabinet also. We have 3 different lights in here. First of all, that's the fan blowing in, and the small tube that pushes the CO2 in. CO2 meter in the top corner. I don't know if you can see it there for the light. The first light I have is a 700 watt. It's 2 350 bulbs, and this is a Maxi Bright, and these are metal halide, and it gives off a good light. And I keep this at least 3 foot above the plants because it does give off heat. These are on, this particular cabinet is on 24 hours. We have a newer type of shade. This is a computer generated shade. I can put my hand down. There is no shadows anywhere underneath this particular bulb and this shade, because as you see, it's like a mirror image and it's waved, and it does give off great intensity of light down onto the plants. The center one is a sodium bulb, 600 watt, again Sunmaster bulb. This is the newer bulb, it's a short one, very intense. Moving on to the end one, we have the metal halide, slightly high in the blue, again the similar type of shade. And being in a cabinet, it's all lined with a silver reflector. It's the proper one from the hydroponic shop. We have a thermometer in here, and I also have a hygrometer in here, which also has a thermometer in it. So it becomes quite technical once you move into cabinets like this. This particular cabinet is enclosed. There's another door goes onto the centre growth that I'm on here. I put young plants into here, and they're in here usually 5 to 7 days, and they come from fairly small to fairly decent plants within that 7 days. Watering is very important. It takes approximately 6 to 8 gallons per day in here because of the intense heat and the fans pulling moisture out and pushing cool air in. So I have lost plants in here. I lost about 800 the first day I actually set the thing up a few years ago. I don't lose many now because obviously you learn how to use them. Some onions that are still lying flat. These were put in yesterday. Put in 3 days earlier are the ones that are standing up, and you can see they've already started to grow. Another couple of days and those onions will be out of here. These are the virus-free leeks starting to grow away very nicely. They're in 1 litre pots now, and they are starting to move, and they're beautiful and clean. And I've just put a few small onions in just to help get everything away in here. Right, I'm going to move out of here. It's a little bit intense. Right, my recommendation would be to use a T5 to start, especially for anyone just starting off with lights. As I say, it doesn't take a ballast to set it away. It can be used fairly close to the plants, so you can drop it down to give it a higher intensity. What we have to understand is what colour does and what light does, intensity of light. First of all, plants grow better they grow on what we know as a par watt system. We see lumens, plants see par watts. Basically, on a cool winter's day, we maybe get 6 hours, 8 hours daylight, and we're lucky if we see a little bit of sunshine. And more often than not, on a poor winter's day, the lux levels that you would read through a camera would probably be somewhere around the 600 mark. Plants stop growing under 1,000. Although I'm talking lumens rather than par watts here. But we do need a higher intensity of light. So these lights will give off anywhere between 800 and, on an 8 bar light like this, will go off anything from 800 to about 1400 lumens. And the closer you have them to the plant, the more intense it is. So the plants will grow better. If you take them a foot away, it loses, each foot that you raise them, it will lose 50% of its output. Also, the colour spectrum that the plants take, they grow on both red and blue spectrum, but they need to be somewhere in between that. So that it's actually green spectrum that we would see. The plant doesn't see green, it absorbs it and produces photosynthesis, and that's what happens with the plant, and that's what makes the plant grow. There are a couple of other things to understand. Photoperiodism. Photoperiodism is the length of daylight hours that you get under the sunshine or in darkness, whichever. Certain plants respond better to more dark. All plants should really have a little bit of a rest period. Now, having said that, I've got 24-hour lights on the plants next door, but there's nothing in there for any given length of time. Usually about 7 days is the maximum that I would put plants in. If I want to really boost something, like I have the onions down the bottom, we give them maybe 10 days max, and I wouldn't give anything beyond that. If you do, your plants will suffer. They will certainly go double-headed. You'll have suckers coming in them. You will burn them. Several things can happen, so it's not worth trying to push something beyond the realms of normality. What most people would do is take a slower growth, let them grow possibly in an open greenhouse, or not quite as intense as my lights, and they would produce plants either on a 10 or a 12-hour system, and they would probably do it over a 6-week period. So they would still end up with big plants over a 6-week period. Because I knock a lot of plants through there, I need to boost them fairly quickly. I've never had any problems with them, and as I say, it's actually learning just how to use the lighting system. On this particular light, as I say, I would reckon for starting something off, give it about 12 hours a day, 6 to a foot, 6 inches to a foot above the plants, and as the plants grow, raise the level a little bit so you can keep it approximately that above the foliage. It's no good having it where the foliage is actually touching, although this particular T5, it shouldn't really burn the plants. Moving on to the LEDs, that's the one that I forgot about before, that we've taken a look at where I can change the spectrum. At the moment, I don't think they are worth the money that we're paying for them. These are the cheaper ones, still costing, I think, 250. The dearer one, the 4-foot one, cost me over £300, and I don't think either of them are as good as a T5. The only ones which would maybe compare with the more intense light that I have off the other bulbs would be the really expensive ones costing £1,000 upwards, and believe me, they can cost way above that, and even then they're not tried and tested. Scientists are learning every day about light and improving lights that we are getting. Actually, today you'll have seen on the news they've just sent a satellite up to the sun. It's going to take more pictures and get as close as it possibly can to the sun, to try and learn more about what the sun actually does, what it gives off, whether it gives off gases, and different types of light that it produces. So again, it will help to produce better plants once they learn more about it. If you're adventurous and you want to really have a go, if you want to aim at the very top, then I would either look at sodium bulbs or the high pressure metal halide. Both are very good, very intense. Both need to have ballast boxes. The new Digi ballast boxes are by far the best. I didn't show you those, but they are next door on the growth cabinet one. They control the light a little bit better. They use a little bit less electricity, so they are good ballast boxes. You will need ballast on both of that type. You don't need a ballast on the LEDs, and you don't need a ballast on the T5. So possibly the recommendation would be to start off with the T5, possibly on an open greenhouse bench. You don't need to make a growth cabinet, although you can. It will hold a little bit extra light in for you if you wish. But I just use those on an open bench, and I usually use them from propagating stages onwards. If you want to put a cabinet up, it depends on the size you've got as to how much light you would put in, but approximately one light will cover an area of 3 foot by 4 foot, whether it's a 600 watt sodium or a 600 watt metal halide, and that will do. It'll be sufficient to make your plants really bounce along. They grow a lot quicker, but again, be careful with temperature, be careful with humidity. You need to learn exactly how much water the plants will take. As I say, it takes me 8 gallons in there per day, and if I miss one day, the plants would burn the day after. So, and they would probably run to seed if that was the case. So you need to be on the ball about that. Photoperiodism is the length of time that you give your plants. So as I've said, most plants will be quite happy with 12 to 14 hours a day, and they will grow greatly enhanced to what we're getting with natural daylight at the present moment. You can push them a little bit further by giving them 18 hours or 24 hours in my case for a few days. Phototropism is where the plant on the outside, if you've got lights and you push it to the maximum, you have plants slightly away from it. Phototropism is when the plant actually bends towards the light. So the plants on the outer side of the light will not stay upright. They'll actually twist over and bend towards the light that you're giving them. So there's a few little things to think about, and as I think of more, there's a lot to think of in one go to try and stand and tell everyone. As I think a little bit more each time, when I come back in the greenhouse, we can give a little bit extra information. If you have any questions, put them forward and I will try and address them. Any queries at all, put a message on the channel, and as I say, we will look at trying to give answers the next time I come on YouTube. Thanks very much. Hope all goes well. Cheers now. Bye bye.